So I have three items on my agenda today. The first is gratitude. The second are some of my goals. And the third is a request. So I'll start with gratitude. Thank you. No, thank you for inviting me to be here and for lending me your precious attention. And actually, I'm going to go one step further with the gratitude and use a formula, a gratitude formula, that I learned from Marshall Rosenberg, if anybody here knows Uncle Marshall. So he was the founder of nonviolent communication, which I call basic human communication. And I feel really confident in saying if we had all learned that when we were 8 years old, the world would be a very different place. But I didn't learn that. I'm hoping to teach my daughter that. And this is one small piece of his guidance for human communication. And the idea in the gratitude formula is for me to be able to say thank you in a way that you cannot reject, in a way that makes it really clear to you the impact you've made on my life, and you can't just say, oh, that was nothing, or don't mention it, or something like that. So there's 3 steps. The first step is to say, I say what you did. The second step is to say how I felt when you did what you did. And the third step is to say kind of what deep need was met in me when you did what you did. So for me, a few weeks ago, after I spoke at the women's rally, March and Swim, a number of people from this congregation got together and invited me to speak here. And that's what you did. And when I got that, I was totally blown away. I was really moved. Because not only have I never given a sermon in a church before, but I had had visions, literal visions for the last 3 years of giving a sermon in a church. And these visions were on a mountaintop, like a literal mountaintop, where I had these visions 3 years in a row, and yet I could not make any movement in this direction. I knew the people to contact, I could not contact them. I was unable to do so. And so by making this invitation, it's brought this dream into fruition for me that I was unable to do by myself. So, thank you. And so now I want to talk about goals. And this is actually a cultural pattern that I've been promoting for some time. And I have all these little patterns that I promote and try and get out there. And this one is about getting to know people, not by asking where they're from or what they do to make money or where they were educated, but by getting to know something different and hopefully deeper about them by asking them about their goals, their vision, what they're here to create in life. So I'm going to share a little bit about that. So the idea is to help people get a sense of like, okay, I just met you. Why do you think you're here? Just like that beautiful story. Like, what are you here to accomplish? How do you wish to live? What does the good life, as Aristotle said, mean for each one of us? And so my goal, I feel like everything, I was like, what is my goal? Like everything I'm doing can be encapsulated by, I have these 4 values, and I'm trying to apply these 4 values across 3 different fields in my life. And the 4 values are truth, love, justice, and courage. And like most of our values, I stole these. I stole these from Gandhi. And so for Gandhi, truth is not just telling the truth, but it implies the pursuit of knowledge. So trying to know exactly what existence is. And love is not just love, but it's nonviolence. It's relating to people with unconditional love. And courage, justice. And justice is not just justice, but it literally translates to non-stealing. And so it's taking exactly what you need, not less and not more, and sharing. And courage is putting oneself in the path of fear. And so if you like Sanskrit, the words are satya for truth, ahimsa for love, asteya for justice or non-stealing, and nirabhaya for fearlessness. And so I'm trying to apply those values in these 3 different fields. The first is my relationship with myself, which is the relationship that takes up most of our time. And in fact, no matter who else you're relating to at any given moment, you are also relating to yourself. And so a lot of the patterns I have when I relate to other people, like when I try and parent, come out of ways in which I've related to myself for a long time. So that's really important. The second is my relationship with my community. So that's the people I can see and relate to, my friends, my family, the people in my band, now you. And the third is this larger community of beings that I haven't met yet. Humans all over the planet, the trees that we walk past on the way to Royal Basin, the earthworms, the beavers, giant squid, paper clips, disposable pens, anything that might be alive, can't be sure, and that I'm not in direct communication with, right? And so I'm trying to apply these values of truth and love and justice and courage to myself, to us, to everything out there. And as I'm doing that, I'm guided by these two halves of my identity. And one is this side that's really focused on math. It's like really guided by math. And this is the how I grew up on Lost Mountain, like very virulently atheist. And really, and when I went to college, I would look for missionaries to argue with them. I'm still proud of that. It was fun. And I would reject anything that could not be objectively verified, right? So that was a big part of my life, and is. And the other side is guided by this one song lyric that a friend of mine wrote years ago, which says, "The sacred race of love that humans can become." And those are my little guidelines. There's this notion that we have the potential to be something much more beautiful than what we're currently displaying, right, as a species. And when I put all that together, the 4 values, the 3 fields, and the 2 guiding lights, the way it results for me is I have this circle of concern, and I'm trying to expand that circle of concern until it encompasses the entire world, and perhaps beyond. So I want to explain that because it's related to this request I'm going to make of you. And so what I mean by circle of concern is the set of beings on whose side we're on. Whose side are we on? That's in the circle of concern. And the most basic, the most elementary circle of concern is yourself. And it's basic, it's elementary, but it's not easy, right? And I know a lot of people who are suffering right now because they're not in their own circle of concern. And that can look many different ways. It can look like self-attack or low self-esteem or judgment or lack of acceptance. And it can result in anxiety and depression and all the other, the words that are out there. So we're at the center, and it doesn't mean it's easy, but that's where it starts. And if you're not at the center of your circle of concern, then that's really important work, right? And this is what I feel like is true and good about selfishness. There's this key thing that selfishness gets right, which is that we are, without us in the center of the circle of concern, it's hard to grow. And I don't know if you've ever read Ayn Rand's work, but which I had a whole journey with in my life. But there's something really true, and I have a lot of criticism of Ayn Rand's work, but there's something that's really true in there, this understanding about the importance of the self, right? And it's what's really true about that whole flight attendant speech with the oxygen and the masks. There's a truth in there, right? Not practicing that self-love limits our ability to love others and contribute to life. The love we have for ourselves and the love we have for each other is the same love. It's cut from the same cloth. So if some of you are into video games, there's that life bar, and that life bar is limited, and you use it, and growing, I believe, our self-love increases that and increases the amount of potential we have to love others. So a long time ago, our ancestors learned that enlarging that circle of concern beyond just the self was a very, very good idea. And they started with including the family unit, and the thing that the modern economists could never, the people who are the proponents of rational self-interest, could never understand is parenting. because you do this thing that has very little relationship to self-interest for a very long time, right? And that's something that we grew that circle of concern, right? We include those people in ourselves. Otherwise, there's no way we would do the things that we do for those people. And, the definition of family is contentious. It's changed a long time ago, like in the animal kingdom and in our ancestors. A non-biological child is not part of the family. It could be abused or thrown off a cliff. And we've really improved in that regard. And we've grown those layers of concern. And the next thing they came up with was the clan. So all these people, they're not like really directly related, but related enough that like, okay, we can work with these people. We can accept them. We might need them in our desperate, quest for survival. We might need their role. And maybe they look a little bit like us, and so they feel safe, or they speak our language, or eat the same food. And in many parts of the world, that way of thinking, that boundary between what's in the circle and what's not, is still along those lines, right? And I spent 5 years living in India as an adult, and I got to see that firsthand. They have the caste system you've probably heard about. And there's all kinds of negative things and criticism of the caste system. But there's something really beautiful that no matter who someone is, if they're in your caste, this extended clan, people extend them all kinds of love. If they'd never met them, they'll go out of their way to help them out just because they share this same profession or surname, this caste thing. It's humbling, really humbling and inspiring to see the lengths that people support each other. It's very different than how I grew up in my little nuclear family, atomic society house on Lost Mountain. And there's room to grow with it. So from my perspective, and again, this is from Gandhi's perspective, that room to grow is about how we treat the other, right? There's the in group in the circle of concern, and then the out group. And like in the caste system, I think they really figured out how to treat the in group. And they have not spent as much time worrying about how to treat the out group correctly, right? So how big is the circle of concern? How many people are in it? How many people are out of it? How do we treat the people who are out of it? You could probably see where I'm going with this. This grows through history from clans into city-states and empires and nations and unification. And the circle of concern grows to the United States or Brazil, which is a place that's like thousands of miles long, and millions of people aligned with a single language and a single flag, usually through force and murder and historical accident that created this. But now we're here. And it's quite an accomplishment, right? People who are willing to serve and sacrifice their own lives and love these millions of unmet members of this group when all they share is this fiction of nationhood, right? That we're born in a place where from space, you would never know that that's considered the same country, right? But we've drawn the lines in that way. This is a very large and advanced circle of concern, or it could be, right? So to go back to the goal of enlarging the circle of concern, the nationhood process is an important part of it, but it's not the end of it. So for me, the end of the process, I'll have to get back. This goes back to the arguing with missionaries and atheists kind of thing. But everyone has their own definition of God. The divine, the mystery, the unseeable. And the one I'm going to use here comes from an ancient Indian text. And they use the word Brahman in their way of cognition, but it just means God. And the definition of it is a mathematical definition. And it is the one without a second. So what that means for these people is that here's the one over here, and it's a set. It's like a bag. And they're like, this bag is God only when there's no other thing over here that's not in the bag. So you just throw all the things in the bag, and if everything is in this bag, but there's a chair out of the bag, then they're like, you can't really call this God. You can only call it God when it includes all of creation. So in math, this is called set theory, and there's like a set, and the set is defined by there being nothing outside of the set, right? That's where I want to get to with this circle of concern. That's where, if that is for us, the path forward. Now we get to the request. So we did the gratitude, we did the goals. You should have a clear idea by now if you're aligned with my goals or not. But today, I'm not going to ask you to include the Israelis and the Palestinians and the Ukrainians and the Russians or the people of the Amazon or the Central African Republic in your circle of concern. That will happen another day when we're ready. But honestly, I don't think we're ready yet. Because today, my ask of you and of me is to include the many, 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 many people that we disagree with about the most fundamental questions in our circle of concern. All of the people who voted the opposite way that you did a few Tuesdays ago. And this is great because it works for you no matter how you voted. Equal opportunity, especially if you voted for some like a fringe candidate like RFK or Jill Stein or Cornel West, then you got a lot more opportunity than the average person to grow the circle of concern. Because all these people have a different vision of the future. And I want us to imagine how we would treat them differently if we truly admitted them into that sacred circle of concern. Because I'm all about fun, I'm going to add a constraint to make this more fun, which is I do not want you to agree with these people. I don't want you to accept their positions, accept the way they see things as true, stop your activism or your advocacy. I want you to hold on to your passion, motivation, your values, your sense of what's right. So this is not about compromise or changing what you believe. This is about adding others into your circle of concern while preserving the tension, the conflict, the disagreement. So let's just take a moment. I'm going to imagine myself successfully doing that. I'm going to think what I would do differently. Can I ask questions?
Sure.
Yeah. So does anyone have an idea of what you might do differently? If you're able to do that?
Talk to them.
Talk to them? Mm-hmm. I love that.
Try to understand their perception.
Try to understand. Mm-hmm. Listen. Yeah. I mean, that's really what I get to as well. You know, if I were to fully integrate what I just said, which might take me my whole life to do, I think I would take every opportunity I could to understand the why. Right? To talk, to listen, to ask questions, and to get to this authentic, incontrovertible, unarguable personal experience of that person that led them to have such wacky beliefs that I can't stand. Right? So there's this distinction, right? It's not like, oh yeah, we're all gonna meet in the middle and agree that you're right about something. It's the idea is to preserve that productive conflict, that tension. This is for maybe another day, but I think that's actually the only way forward politically to get to ideas that really work for everyone is to have this dialectical synthesis, for lack of a better word. But today it's really about looking kind of deeper, right? So, because you can argue about positions all day long, and sometimes it's the right thing to do if you have an actual decision to make with someone. But most of the time, it's really useless and counterproductive. Because any productive intellectual discussion has to be in the context of a relationship. And there's just no point in me getting into it about immigration policy with somebody at the Clallam Co-op just because we're wearing different hats. Because there's no relationship to contain that discussion. I don't know you, you don't know me, I don't know that you care about me, you don't know that I care about you. Then what? Then I'm afraid of you, I'm afraid of my safety, I'm afraid of your judgment, physical security. Freaked out, nervous system, not good conditions for learning something. That's not conducive to the softening of the heart that must be present when we're talking about something complicated. And right now, the ratio in our society and in my life is really way off. Like there's one side where there's just like a lot of arguing, and some of it's out loud, some of it's online, a lot of it's just in our head, like silent judgment. And then there's like a little bit of like good questioning and listening and things that we talked about. But the ratio is like really high in terms of the arguing and the discussion versus the actual inquiry, right? And that the request here is for us to flip that ratio so we can contextualize the discussions, the political and intellectual discussions, in the relationship that we built. So what this is equivalent to, I'm going to slowly bring us in for a landing, is looking at the definition of an enemy and expanding that circle of concern to squeeze out the space that an enemy requires. So what I'm talking about is marginalizing the idea of an enemy because it's not practically helpful. So keep your intellect, keep your values, keep your positions for now, but include the other beings as worthy of understanding, worthy of getting to know, worthy of getting that deeper why, which means removing them from the enemy column. So I'm going to close this out from some wisdom with a teacher of mine. The title of this talk is What is an Enemy? And I got this phrase from one of my mentors. His name is Ken Cloak. He's a professional mediator. He's a man in his 80s who's been mediating for 50 years. He's done 20 or 30,000 mediations. And he participated in nonviolent disobedience struggles in the 60s in the South and just kind of kept growing from there. And in my mind, he's really an example of like living Gandhian ideas, right? And this is what he told me the other day about what an enemy is. And I'm going to share with you his words verbatim, and then I'm going to say thank you. And that'll be the end of my talk. So, what is an enemy? Someone whose sight, smell, sound of voice, or even name generates a feeling of anger, fear, grief, shame, guilt, jealousy, or hatred inside you. Someone to whom you no longer extend empathy or compassion. Someone for whom dignity and respect are conditional and easily withheld. Someone for whom it is possible to rationalize or justify acts of meanness or cruelty. Someone in whose presence you become inauthentic, off balance, stressed, and are different from who you are naturally. Someone for whom you already know the answers without having to ask the questions. Someone you feel unprepared to forgive or reconcile or trust. Someone with whom you are unwilling to engage in dialogue. Someone it is easy to dehumanize, stereotype, demonize, marginalize, prejudge, and discriminate against. Someone for whom you cannot experience love, generosity, gratitude, or kindness. In other words, someone who owns you.
Someone what?
Who owns you. Thank you.